My name is Barry Helfmann. I have the pleasure of coming in as the president-elect of the American Group Psychotherapy Association, but I have a much bigger pleasure in celebrating the 75th anniversary of our organization. We have 6 people here who have made huge contributions to the organization, to the field, and in a sense we have 6 of our superstars. So you don't get a chance often to have such a group together, and we're going to have a chance to talk about the last 25 years and maybe even a little bit about the future. But let me introduce our stars. Dr. Elliot Zeisel, Dr. Norm Neiberg, Josephine Cunningham Tervalon, Dr. Scott Rutan, Mary DeLuey, and Dr. Walter Stone, 3 of whom are ex-presidents of our association. So in getting started, I wondered if we could take a look at perhaps talk about what's been your most memorable experience at AGPA over the last 25 years. And Scott, I'm going to ask you to start.
Well, I guess in some ways my most memorable was the first workshop I attended. I was a guest of Norm Neiberg, who let me stay in his hotel room because I couldn't afford to come down on my own in those days. And I was in a workshop by John Gladfelter in transactional analysis, which I'd never before encountered, and remember it to this day, and I've never, I think I may have missed 1 or 2 meetings since, and that was 1960, something like that. You know.
When I became president in 1980, that the organization was facing a kind of crisis. There were many people left over from the Second World War and stuff, many of whom were doing their own thing and were very undisciplined. And we needed to do something to pull the organization together. So with Irv Berger, who was a mentor to me, we set up the Institute the way it's currently existing now. There were other things that were involved when I was president. We bought the property in New York. We helped the Canadian Group Psychotherapy Organization get developed, and probably 1,000,001 other things. The final thing that I feel was important to me was I met some wonderful people here over the years. They continue to be my friends, and I've loved leading groups at the Institute over the years because I think I've added value, because that's something I do well, and I want to transport it to other people.
During David Hawkins' administration, when he was president, and I remember when David was president, it was around the time that the DSM declassified homosexuality as a disease disorder, and the organization brought in the gay men's chorus to sing in honor of David, and it was one of the more moving moments for me to think of the organization as taking a stand for something that was right and socially just. I was very proud to be part of the organization. And then the other thing that came to mind was the response we had as an organization to 9/11, where we moved from being a guild to being a service organization and rendered an enormous service to survivors and first responders in the 9/11 crisis. With the help of the New York Times, who gave us a grant, within the space of a couple of months, AGPA, the administration, the membership, rose up and became a force, a healing force that continues to this day.
The memorable moment for me that began for me was when Ann Alonso gave her address at the 50th anniversary. And it was she called it the Village Well. And that struck me at the time as being such a poignant connection, because it's when I realized that AGPA was my professional home. I had found a community in those years, and that this is all of you here and the people that I have such wonderful connections with. And we go through life, death, the misery, the joys of our world, and we share it with each other, and this is the community we have.
The first time I went to a meeting of Southwestern, I met Theo Abel, who was a very significant member of that at that time in the Southwest. And I remember being asked if I would co-lead a group with her. And even though I had done groups, I had not been introduced to some of the theories that were being dealt with in the AGPA. But I certainly felt competent to work with her. But what an experience for me as a very new person at that time.
I lived in Cincinnati, and I was a senior resident when I first came to AGPA in 1964. Then I met a character from Boston, sitting over here, J. Scott Rutan, and we lied to one another about how much we knew about theory and so on, and we soon began to collaborate and write a book together, which of course then consolidated a lot of one's thinking about doing group therapy. But what I can remember about the first session I came to at AGPA was how I felt almost as if I knew nothing about what people were talking about. I had been trained in Whitman and Stock group focal conflict, and I had to, every session I had to sit down and figure out the group focal conflict and what were these other people talking about. And so it became a very broadening experience for me to hear the other theories, and then I became involved because Heinz Kohut came to Cincinnati, and I began to talk about self-psychology and group psychotherapy, and I think that's one of the things that I felt I've contributed to the field.
I wonder if what some of you would say about, well, what's really changed in the last 25 years? How has your practice changed? How do you see the field? You know, slightly over 30 years ago, we were a pretty narrow theoretical organization.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that influenced our widening perspectives was observing the institute groups and realizing that there's a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of terrific work very differently, and so it really helped focus that. But I've been impressed over the years with the way this organization, like societies, has sort of dealt with growing pains. It was a very narrow organization at first, very, the Jewish Board of Guardians, Jewish psychiatry primarily, very hard for psychologists to get in, harder for social workers. That gradually changed. Our first social worker president was Manny Halowitz. That was in the 70s, right? And we went from that whole issue of inclusion to then issue of theory. And we had tremendous battles with theory when Gestalt and transactional analysts, et cetera, who were really dynamic therapists, but talking a different language.
When I first came here as a young man, I didn't know how much I didn't know. But when I got here and began to attend sessions with people and got to see how other people work, I began to understand that what they do that was different from what I do, how it could be incorporated into what I do. So my theory of practice expanded. Seems to do that every year. When I come here, there's not a year that goes by when I haven't attended something that teaches me something new that I can use, some verbal intervention that I can use in my work, which keeps me fresh.
And then there's the influence that large group has brought into my world and into our world as an organization. I was a part of the first development of the large group here, and that has had its arc of growth and been very exciting and conflict in the organization. It's sort of a parallel process to some of the issues in the organization brought out in the large group, and it's been a home for many of us to work in that format. We had social dreaming. I was a part of that. Developing workshops in that area, all very exciting. This is where the edge of my professional world, the excitement in developing things has come from. It's through AGPA and the support of all of you colleagues.
I smiled because my groups used to, I'd come home from the conference, they'd say, "You've been to that meeting again."
That's
I would
right,
be doing
that's
something
right.
different.
Was the tremendous change in how group therapists are trained. I think when I began here, the organization was really secondary to training in group therapy. I think now it's the tour de force. And I think this organization has become the primary force for training group therapists, re-educating them, and nurturing them at least once a year. And I think the nurturing process is absolutely crucial.
I think one of the things that has been major, there are more than one thing that I think that's been major changes to the value of the organization. And that is, one, the impact that women task force made some significant changes in where women fit in the organization administratively, and also the impact of working groups for women that were specific about women's issues, and how that impacted the organization.
Kind of person who's willing to be a group therapist and be in groups, which is, as you say, renegades in a way too, all of us in a way. We're not just sitting alone with patients, but being willing to risk the transparency that comes with sitting with a group of people.
Yes, the demonstration groups that we've had leadership in, and the live supervision sessions that we've had in the conferences. These are all breakthrough work that we've done in the organization.
But I think too that it's the structure of how the meeting is set up and how we mentor people, the tables, for example,
Yes.
and the way that young people can come into the organization and start with a poster session and then graduate to an open session or a workshop or an institute, and how we bring people along in their careers as clinician teachers and researchers is a credit to what we do at AGPA.
This organization has had one person running its central office for at least 35 years, perhaps longer. And that's the non-group therapist part. Without that stability and without that holding aspect, things would not have turned out as they have. And I think that's very important.
What do you think about the future of the organization, the future of healthcare, and particularly the future of group therapy, which everybody here would say is underutilized and not undervalued, but underutilized?
I have a lot of young people in my practice who are developing as group therapists. And I'm also seeing young people take the work and apply it in educational settings. So there's a movement now for social emotional learning, for example, where they're incorporating group therapy skills, group leadership skills into the classroom. So I'm kind of encouraged by that development, and I think that this generation that's coming up is going to do things with the work and apply it in ways that we don't yet understand or see.
So as the premier now training university for a group, what do you think about the whole area of telepsychology and the use of the internet and technology as a continued and expanded training opportunity?
For a number of years I've been doing supervision and teaching to the Chinese over Skype. For an hour and a half a week. And they've invited me to China, but I think the important thing is that I've provided opportunities to teach their leadership, and I'm going to start supervising the supervisors.
That's great. That's great.
I now have 4 groups a week that work telephonically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 1 in Rochester, 3 in Austin, Texas.
Oh, that's great.
And I wasn't sure it was going to work, but it's been remarkably effective. It's not the same as being in the room, not as effective as being in the room, but it's remarkable to see how much these people have learned over the last 16 years.
I'd like to think that myself and all the rest of us have in some way moved the Group Therapy Association ahead. And where it is now is way ahead of where it was when I was president. But that's called progress, and I hope it continues to evolve that way.
I would like to see the AGPA funded much like a university is funded. We need an endowment.
Yeah.
And with an endowment, there's so much more that we could do to promote the importance of group therapy in the world. There's so much more we could do to promote the
Research.
teaching and research that,
Yeah.
that goes along with practice.
Right.
And I would very much like to see that in my lifetime.
I would like to see the costs of the meetings go down. I think it's incredibly expensive, and speaking to your point, there are a lot of people who would love to be here and cannot afford to be. We have a scholarship program, which is very nice and very helpful, but still it's pricey by the time you spend the money for the hotels and the flights and giving up practice, and I would love to see it in some ways. Maybe that's where
I'd like
the
to
funding
see.
can
I'd
go.
like to see an expanded scholarship program.
Expanded scholarship program.
Yep.
I think we do need to do a better job at marketing ourselves to the global community, because we have something very, very valued in our world here as we're speaking about it. We need to market it.
I'd like to see younger professionals, and I think they're
They're all younger.
that's true.
That's true, they're all young.
At one point, there was bringing in a new person to be a co-chair or on a committee or a piece of the administrative work or an administrative role in the organization, where they then have an opportunity to grow into the leadership's work. I'd like to see more of that.
Find ways of helping the younger people write and write articles for the journal of their experiences, because I think they take a different perspective about groups than we have, as they've learned it in a different time and era.
That's the mentorship.
Yes.
You know, if you think of AGPA as a university, an underfunded university, the societies are sort of the feeder schools that you develop locally. You get a chance to present and develop yourself as a clinician teacher, and then you take a step toward the national meeting and get to feel even more important in the process.
I really want to thank you all for doing this. I think this is going to be a wonderful video example of celebrating next year, not just the 75th, but the organization, and to look at all of you as mentors, role models, people who've done so much, and as an encouragement for other younger members to really, you know, begin to take it. So I personally really appreciate it. I want to thank each and every one of you.
Happy 75th anniversary
for AGPA.